Hello and welcome to Ellroy Reads. This is the show where every week I look at a book that was important to James Ellroy. Firstly, a big hello to all our new subscribers. It is scientifically proven that subscribers make better lovers, so hit that subscribe button and don't miss out. And on the subject of Amore, today's book is The Big Hurt, a memoir by Erika Schickel. Now, I should say that, unlike most of the books I'd cover on this show, Ellroy hasn't actually read this book. He's in it, and I read it for him. Um, Most of you know by now that I'm James Ellroy's biographer, and I wrote Love Me, Fears and Danger, The Life of James Ellroy. Echoing, I'm just putting that out there. And when I was working on the biography, The Big Hurt came out. So Erika Schickel was in a relationship with James Ellroy, and when for several years, and when that subsequently ended, she wrote a memoir about their time together. Now, to give you a bit of backstory about Erika, she's the daughter of quite famous literary parents. Her father, Richard Schickel, was a big film critic, up there with Roger Ebert, and her mother, Julia Whedon, was a novelist. And when she went to the elite Buxton School in New England, and the memoir is really it's about two things. One is about her relationship with James Ellroy, and two, it was about a time when she was expelled over an affair with a teacher. The teacher actually worked at nearby Bennington College, which was just as exclusive. And how that affected her, the trauma, and how that went on really for the rest of her life. And so she's expelled, but she goes into adulthood, and she marries, she has children. Her husband's actually working for her father because her father was producing a lot of books as a film critic. He had his own company. And she meets James Ellroy while she's still married at a bar near the Ravenswood, which is where Ellroy lived in LA at the time. And she slowly becomes infatuated with him, really. I think it's fair to say that. And she had no real plans, to meet him again, for him to be part of her life. But they meet at the LA Times Festival of Books because she'd written a quite very well received memoir or memoir called You're Not the Boss of Me, Adventures of a Modern Mom. And her literary career had started and looked quite promising. And Ellroy, she said, is very charming. He's like, Miss Schickel, we're delighted to see you again. And, this was a period in his life where he divorced from Helen Canoda. It was his second divorce. He was on quite a tailspin. He was burning for affairs. And he had plans for a memoir himself. He was going to call it The Big Hurt, after the Tony Fisher song. And Ellroy just loves those kind of 50s jukebox bubblegum hits. I mean, I used to play a lot of them, just to have a kind of soundtrack to the biography when I was writing about his numerous relationships and affairs. It used to drive my wife crazy. She couldn't stand those songs. Some of them are a bit tinny. Anyway, I'm moving on. So she said she had plans for a memoir about her schooling and the whole falling out from that. And Ellroy said he would help her, and that became the artifice of their affair. Although the affair is emotional at first, platonic, they begin to meet. They've been corresponding on Facebook and things like that. And Ellroy is actually going around to his PA's house because Ellroy is completely offline, doesn't have a cell phone. But he was using his PA's computer to write Facebook messages, going back and forth, and obviously the level of intimacy was increasing, and so was the level of deceit, because Erika began lying to her husband about saying she was going to a yoga class when she was actually meeting Ellroy. But that became untenable, and the marriage ended quite messily, and she begins a real public affair. In fact, there was a video of where she announces the relationship at the Zocalo Public Square lectures. It was actually a public interview, and she stepped in for the last minute because Helen was going to interview Ellroy, and then she dropped out. And then Erika interviews Ellroy. And it was quite a video where she said, instead of listening to Helen, Ellroy's ex-wife, interview Ellroy, you're going to listen to Erika Schickel, Ellroy's lover, interview Ellroy, and the gasp from the audience. So this affair was, or relationship, I should say, by this stage. This relationship had a kind of mixed response in public, and Erika says, although she loved Ellroy, I mean, she loved him. I mean, it started. She was besotted with him, and then she grew to love him definitely on an emotional level more than the kind of the physical attraction. It received a mixed response. She lost friends who were shocked that she would walk out on a marriage. Relationship with daughters came under strain, although thankfully that resolved itself in time. And she became somewhat ostracized in the LA writing community, of which she'd once been a very promising member. Her memoir, the second memoir, at the first didn't get off the ground. She said Ellroy made a few stabs at helping her, but then he soon lost interest. And his memoir, which was originally titled The Big Hurt, became The Hilliker Curse, which many people feel is his worst book. And he was very, 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 very sheepish about it with me. He said he was quite happy for that book to go out of print. So after the relationship had ended, Erika returned to the memoir and decided, now she had all this material because she'd had this quite tumultuous relationship with Ellroy. She could write into it, so it jumps between the two narrative strands. So everything that went down at Buxton and Bennington, and subsequent marriage, and then the relationship with Ellroy, and it's quite dramatic stuff and gripping stuff on both levels. So the relationship with Ellroy came at a time when he relapsed, and she got him into the 180 Center, but she had very little faith in the 180 Center. And I will say, as a rehab center, that closed after 3 years. She's very, very critical of the married couple who run it. And they've subsequently opened new rehab centers, which have also run into controversy. People have died on the premises. So all of that stuff's kind of gripping, and the Buxton Bennington stuff is the Buxton Bennington material narrative is also very, very gripping, because she finds out, to her indignation, that the teacher who she'd also been in love with takes her out to, I think it's a cornfield one day, to break it off, and he actually begins with the line, Erika, I am in torment, which when I first read it, I was just like, is that a parody? I don't know, it sounds like a D.H. Lawrence novel. No, apparently that's what he said. And she finds out later that he was never dismissed from his post. While she took the fall, she got expelled. He was never dismissed from his post at Bennington, and for years he worked there, and the staff knew there was a sexual predator who liked the students, and they did nothing about it. And this kind of gets wrapped up in the whole Me Too movement, which, we probably know the big main stories of Me Too. So Weinstein, and you probably know, obviously, Kevin Spacey, which is obviously ties into Ellroy because LA Confidential, and he was actually inappropriate on the set of LA Confidential with Guy Pearce. But it's interesting that how it has affected educational establishments as well, because because the legal process is very, very slow. I mean, it has to be, but there is obviously kind of public shaming of these schools, and obviously they suffer institutional damage, and they suffer reputational damage, and all of that happens kind of outside of the closed doors inquiries and that sort of thing. So she's very, very indignant about the way she was treated as a young person who didn't know better. In terms of, she didn't know better in terms of the consequences. She kind of imagined that all of that, it was right that all of that came down on her. And there's a very, very moving scene towards the end of the book where she is talking to a friend of hers called CJ, who also suffered sexual abuse as a young man, and has had an extremely traumatic adulthood subsequently, and even more traumatic than hers. And yeah, it's sad to read. Well, it's melancholic and it's moving to read, two survivors talk about their story, and CJ sadly passes away. And when the book came out, so I'd interviewed Erika for my biography, and I will say that Ellroy was not thrilled at me. Well, he was nervous about me interviewing Erika, but he understood. He never put anything in my way. He's just like, "You're my biographer. You've got to do it." Obviously, that she was in my life, and I really kind of admired him for that. And we had a very very good interview with Erica, and she was very candid and very eloquent, and she never once in the interview, and she never once in the book blames Elroy. She calls him Sam Spade in the book, by the way. She never blames him for all of the stuff that comes down on her, like the end of a marriage and things like that. Although obviously he kind of had a part in it, in a role, but she never blames him for that. And she still loves him. And I don't think Elroy. I could never quite get that into Elroy's head that she still loved him. Now, bear in mind, like obviously he's back with Helen. And no one is suggesting that he should, up sticks and move again. No, not at all. But like, I think he felt at first that because cancel culture was coming out, and I think he felt that she was trying to cancel him, and like I don't think anyone could read this and think Erika wants Elroy to be cancelled. It's a very well written book. I'm recommending it, and she obviously talks about the two sides of him coexisting. So the generous side, um, the kind side, the monstrously talented side, seriously talented. She talks about, he goes into the 180 center and he'd really hit rock bottom in terms of his relapse and addiction. And the first time she goes to visit him, he's sat up in his chair. He's sober now. He's been sober for a few days, and he's outlining perfidia. And Helen would say the same thing to me. I could never understand how through relapse and rehab and everything, Elroy could still get books out. I mean, that's serious talent. And yeah, but there are small things, and that obviously that when you read you that are very very kind of disturbing, or obviously show Elroy's kind of meaner side, perhaps the side of him that's come out through trauma. Although in many ways, both Helen and Erika, who I should say don't like each other, um, had very, very different readings of Elroy, and everything that happened. They're very different readings. I had to respect both, and I do respect both. I like both women, although they didn't like each other. Both one thing they did have in common is they said all the trauma. You don't realize they both thought Jean Elroy was a terrible mother, terrible. And maybe it takes a woman to say that because Elroy is quite chivalrous, and no one has probably got very old-fashioned views about courtliness, and that comes through a lot. Considering this is a book about adultery and philandering and everything, is that the chivalry comes through a lot. So, but they both agreed his mother abandoned him. She was inappropriately sexual. She would leave him somewhere to be with some guy, and that's not good mothering. And then Elroy, maybe as a way of coping, has come out with this story that she could have been a doctor and everything. And of course, what happened to her was absolutely tragic and disgraceful, and no one deserves that. But it was interesting. I thought it was very interesting that both Helen and Erika had a very different reading of his mother than what he said in public. And while he didn't repeat what they said about his mother, he had gone a lot quieter on her in terms of he wasn't idolizing her as a person, and wasn't, in a way, he'd kind of embraced closure, whereas previously he'd been saying closure is bullshit and all this, and we will go on, and the relationship will go on. It's a continuum, and like he'd stopped that. But there are some disturbing aspects of Elroy's character, like when Erika says she's a fan of the comedian Dave Chappelle, his response to that surprised her. And I'm just going to show you a little clip now of my conversation when I had to tell Elroy everything that was in this book. Okay. Can you see it? That's about it. Like I said, so the Dave Chappelle thing she mentioned before.
Well, Dave and I were on the Conan O'Brien show together. We were having a good time. We were doing something about the Equal Opportunity Klan.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
Go out on the prowl. And I said, I can't. I don't cheat on my wife. That was the dialogue with Dave Chappelle.
Oh, so he's a man about town, is he?
Well, he was.
Okay, that's enough. That bit always amused me. Yeah, they had argued over Dave Chappelle. And, so when I had this meeting with Ellroy, and you can probably tell from that video, I was a little bit nervous. I went in, I was just like, okay, don't shoot the messenger. But I've read Erika's book. And he's like, oh, okay, good, tell me everything. And so I kind of just went through it, and I said, look, I don't think this book was written to damage you. I mean, he still wasn't happy with it. I couldn't get through to him that it comes through that, she really loved you and still does love you obviously from a distance now. So we went through it bit by bit, but I went through some of the things, like he had rules that for her relationship she couldn't paint her toenails, she couldn't dance, and he kind of brushed that aside. But in that video which I've just showed you, there's a time when I turned to one side to get a book, and he saw my top knot because it's higher lockdown. I had long hair. By that stage, I had it by choice. I thought it looked pretty good. It was new to me, so I quite kind of liked it. And I could see the disappointment in his face because, he's very old-fashioned and he's got these rules and he doesn't like things like guys with long hair and stuff. So I kind of saw that side to him, and so yeah. But afterwards, when I told my wife about the conversation, she's like, Steve, you must be the only man who's said that Dave Chappelle is a man about town, who's phrased it quite like that. She thought it was hilarious. Anyway, that's my recommendation for this week. The Big Hurt. It is, you'd be surprised. I think a lot of Ellroy readers, a lot of them were emailing me at the time saying, oh, I'm really angry about this book that's coming out. And I've just said, don't be. It's a very interesting and complex and nuanced portrait of Ellroy, and I don't think it did him really that much damage. But some people might disagree. That's but it's an important book in the whole Me Too chapter saga. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and next time we'll be going back and looking at another novel. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.